Today, we are going to discuss an incredibly important topic for women, and without a doubt, the number one requested podcast topic since I started doing this podcast. So why did it take me 20 episodes before I'm finally discussing female hormones? If I'm being honest, I've been putting it off because it frightens me a little bit. It frightens me because it is a very challenging topic for a wide variety of reasons, and I really want to do it justice because of how important it is. So I pray for all of my female listeners that you really find the tremendous value in what I'm going to share with you today. Welcome to the Foundational Health Podcast, where we provide education and inspiration to help guide you on your journey to look better, feel better, and most importantly, heal better. Hello and welcome to the Foundational Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Kevin Schultz, and today we are going to talk about how to naturally balance female hormones. Okay, before I get started, let's talk about what this podcast is going to look like today. As I mentioned, this is a very challenging topic for a wide variety of reasons. There's so many different aspects of hormones, and especially when we're talking about female hormones. And I realized as I was doing the research for this podcast and putting it all together that if I was going to do a deep dive into menstrual cycles, perimenopause, menopause, different hormones of each one of those, the different symptoms of each one of those, birth control pills, hormone replacement therapy, we would be here for 5 hours at least and still probably just barely be scratching the surface of everything. So as a result, I decided to stick with what I consider to be more of my level of expertise and educate you instead on how to balance hormones naturally, no matter where you are in life. And certainly there are some nuances in that we're going to get into today, especially with things like exercise-specific stuff that changes depending on whether you're in your 20s or if you're in your 40s and 50s. That can look very different, especially for women that are in their 40s and 50s and in the midst of perimenopause or menopause. But as a whole, we are going to focus on discussing natural things that will help you balance hormones no matter where you are in life. So we're going to talk about nutrition and exercise. We're going to talk about sleep. We're going to talk about toxicity, hydration, and more. But we're going to look at it from a female-specific perspective and how it affects female hormones. So we're not going to just talk about what to eat, but instead we're going to talk about what to eat and when to eat it, specific to female hormones. We're going to talk about what type of resistance training and what type of cardiovascular exercise you should be doing for balancing hormones. And how does that differ if in your 20s versus your 30s, 40s, or 50s? How do toxins play a role in hormones? What are the best tips and tricks around sleep that are going to have the biggest effect on allowing you to hit the deep stages of sleep where your body does the large majority of its healing, up to 85% of its healing. And of course, part of healing is where hormones are balanced. So that is going to be the main focus for the day. But be sure to stick around to the end because for those of you that are not ready to make lifestyle changes right now or not willing to make lifestyle changes, if that's the case, you probably wouldn't be here. But even for those of you who are ready but still really just needing some symptomatic relief right now as you incorporate these things, from whether it's menstrual cramps or perimenopause or menopause symptoms. For younger women, I know, and I get this question all the time, especially when you're having your monthly cycle, that those cramps that happen and all of the other symptoms, migraines, headaches that go along with that, the hot flashes for perimenopause. Obviously, people are looking for symptomatic relief, and that's what I'm going to talk about at the end, as well as, of course, all the lifestyle changes throughout that are going to help with that. So I promise at the end to give you some great tips for things like essential oils and supplements that can, for some, provide tremendous symptomatic relief at times. So let's talk about terminology to start with, because when it comes to female hormones and menopause, There's a lot of different terms and definitions that are thrown around that at times can be very confusing, but really it's pretty simple when you break it down. So menopause is technically one day on the calendar. It's not talked about like that, but it is technically one day on the calendar, and it is the day that you have naturally been without a menstrual cycle for 12 months. Now, typically for most women, this happens in their late 40s or their early 50s, but obviously that can vary from woman to woman. Anything after menopause, that one day, is called post-menopause. Anything before that day is pre-menopause. And then there is perimenopause. And perimenopause, this is typically where you see all of the different symptoms, the body composition changes, the mood changes, the symptoms that are associated with what people refer to as menopause, but technically it is perimenopause. When it comes to hormones, most women think of things like estrogen and progesterone, especially, as strictly reproductive. And I think we all know, women and men, that they're more than that. But the reality is they're much more than that. These hormones affect every single bodily system down to the very smallest cellular structure. And this is why one of the reasons that this is such an important topic. So the importance of balancing them and keeping them healthy is absolutely critical. Yes, to short-term health and reducing symptoms, but also for long-term quality of life and longevity, which if you've been listening to me, you know that that's what I'm all about. Yes, we all want to look better and feel better in the short term, but the key is healing better, quality of life long-term for however long that is we live, but ideally improving our quality of life, which leads to better longevity. As we get into the nuts and bolts of what to do, what not to do, I'm going to focus today on research. And here is what is incredibly important to understand. We're going to be talking about new research that literally had not been done before. And I'll explain that more as we go along. So you have not been given misinformation on purpose by me or by a lot of other people. At least I would hope to believe not misinformation on purpose. The information was simply not available. The research hadn't been done specifically on women, especially as it pertains to hormones and especially as it pertains to hormones during perimenopause and post-menopause. So that's really important to understand. And I will definitely, as I said, I will explain that more and I'll point that out as we go because it really is incredibly important and it's going to go against your common thinking and what we have been trained to do. I shouldn't say we, what women have been trained to do based on research that was either not done or not accurate. So let's start with looking at food. We're going to start with the food topic on what to add. So as far as adding goes, as I talk about all the time, if you go back to my nutrition podcasts, which I've had several of, organic, whole food, well-rounded, wide variety diet nutrition is always going to be best. You want to focus on a wide variety of nuts and seeds, a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, a wide variety of organic, high quality meats and eggs. That is always going to be best, whether we're talking about balancing hormones, brain health, heart health, men, women, it doesn't matter. You want to focus on building your meals around protein also. Shoot for 0.75 to 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. So for somebody that's 150 pounds, if they're shooting for 1 gram, that is going to be 150 grams. So 0.75 to 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. And then you would break that up throughout the day in ideally 3 to 4 meals. That doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, did I get 40 exactly on each meal? That's not the way it works. Your body takes that throughout the day. It combines it and it uses it. You definitely want to focus on high quality, highly absorbable protein. So go back to my protein podcast if you need more content on that. But all the proteins that I just mentioned, especially eggs, are going to be the highest absorbable and usable proteins when it comes to adding things like muscle. Focus on things like fatty, wild-caught fish, especially wild-caught Alaskan sockeye salmon, sardines, mackerels. Those are all amazing sources of omega-3s, and omega-3s are essential for facilitating proper hormone production and balance in your body. Also, grass-fed and pasture-raised red meats, as well as pastured poultry along with pastured eggs, are going to be much higher in omega-3s, lower in omega-6s because they're not fed grains, and they're so much better for you when it comes to hormones and balancing hormones as well as symptom reduction. Cruciferous vegetables are also fantastic. So focusing on things like broccoli, cabbage, and kale, they all contain nutrients, vitamins, minerals that are going to help balance, especially estrogen, and help balance it naturally. Probiotic-rich foods are also great when we're talking about hormones. So probiotic-rich foods like plain, grass-fed, full-fat, organic, kefir, and yogurt are amazing for you. Conventional dairy, by the way, things that are not all of the great things that I just mentioned, but conventional pasteurized dairy that's not organic, that has additives in it, is the polar opposite, and it's horrible for your hormones and symptoms. In fact, somebody asked me a question not too long ago, like, what do you consider to be some of the worst foods when it comes to what people consider to be a health food? And without a doubt, one of the things that jumps to mind immediately is yogurt. People always talk about like, oh, yogurt is so amazing for you. And they're running out and they're getting Dannon yogurt and all of the other main name brands that are none of the things that I just talked about. They have added sugars. They've got added colorings often, added flavorings that are not natural. They also are conventional dairy with hormones added into them. I could go on and on. So avoid the conventional dairy. Stick with the things that I just mentioned, because those are going to be good for your hormones as opposed to bad for your hormones, despite what the marketing may say on that conventional dairy packaging. Sauerkraut, kimchi, also great to add on a regular basis for probiotic-rich foods. As far as things to avoid processed and packaged foods. We talk about this all of the time. So important when it comes to hormones. Avoid conventional meats that are pumped full of artificial growth hormones and fed grains that are horrible for you, and turn the meat into a low-quality meat instead of a high-quality meat. And yes, even when it says hormone-free on your chicken package, there are ways around the labeling that still allow them to put growth hormone type chemicals into the animal's feed. So do not trust that. Always source, when possible, the high quality meat from local trusted farmers. We have some great relationships and great farms around this area. Some of those are listed on our website. I list them on Facebook all the time. And then you can also refer back to my podcast that I did specifically on grass-fed versus grain-fed meat, where I talked about a lot of those local farms to me. But there are farms that are local to me that ship nationwide, and there's also great farms across the nation. Avoid the evil 8 seed oils. Guess what is the number one way to avoid the evil 8 oils? Avoid packaged processed food. That's where you're going to find the majority of that. So those evil 8 oils, for those of you that need a reminder on that, we have soy, sunflower, safflower, corn, cottonseed, canola, grape seed and rice bran oils. So those are the evil 8, but there's more. And most of the oils that are used in packaged processed foods are not going to be good for you. Even the ones that you think of like, oh, that sounds like a really good one, very often they're rancid. So just avoid those packaged processed foods when you can, and as much as possible, moving more towards that whole food, well-rounded, wide variety, organic diet. This, what I'm about to talk about, is an excellent tip and something that I have not previously talked about specific to women, whether it's on Facebook or in a podcast. So 30 minutes after waking up is when women have a spike in cortisol. And at that point, it is, from a hormonal standpoint especially, it is so important to eat 30 minutes after waking. So that's when cortisol spikes. And I know this goes against some advice I've given in the past because I wasn't aware of this. I know this goes against the common school of thought out there for intermittent fasting, which works fantastic when you're a man, but doesn't always work fantastic when you're a woman because of the very different hormonal changes in women that happen as they age and just the differences in women versus male hormones in general. So ideally at that time, 30 minutes after waking, when that cortisol spikes, that's when you should be trying to get in around 15 grams of protein, 30 grams of some carbs, and you want to make those high quality carbs, ideally fruits, vegetables. Fruits is what most people, of course, go to in the morning. And those 30 grams of carbs, along with the 15 grams of protein, are going to allow you to basically get some fuel in the tank to bring those cortisol levels down so they're not continuing to spike. I won't go through all of the science, but there's a lot of science behind that. And then that advice of eating 30 minutes after waking becomes even more important if you're going to be doing exercise in the morning. There are studies that now show the best changes in women as far as metabolism and becoming metabolically healthy, as well as balancing your circadian clock, is when women eat with their circadian clock, which is first food of the day by about 8 p.m. and last food of the day by about 6 p.m. That does not have to be exact. So you don't have to get caught up in like, oh, my schedule doesn't allow that. If it does, fantastic. Wake up at about 7:30, get that first food in the morning in around 8 a.m. and eat your last meal of the day at about 6 p.m. That is going to be the ideal situation for balancing your circadian clock, balancing hormones over time. And these same studies also show that eating first thing in the morning will help you sleep better at night as well. So just a bonus. Let's talk about hydration. If you are chronically dehydrated, it is impossible, literally impossible for your body to produce and balance hormones regularly and properly. So you can nail your nutrition. Like you could be perfect with your nutrition, but then you're not drinking enough water, or you're not doing it properly, which we're going to talk about. And no, it doesn't throw everything out the window, but it handicaps your body on its ability to balance hormones properly. So you want to make sure, yes, you've nailed the nutrition or you're improving on it depending on where you're at, but then you're also really focusing on hydration. So 3 main tips when it comes to hydration. You want to shoot for a minimum of half your ideal body weight in ounces of water per day, up to 1 gallon. So if somebody weighs 150 pounds, that would be 75 ounces of water per day. And that is, remember, that's a minimum. So it doesn't mean like, shoot for 75 as your maximum, but if you get 40 or 50 in, that's great. Certainly it's better if you're currently drinking 20 ounces, which I hear all the time, but it's still not good and it is not ideal. You want to shoot for half of your body weight, half of your ideal body weight in ounces per day at a minimum, and then up up to 1 gallon. That's going to differ, obviously, depending on how much you're exercising and sweating and your size and lots of different factors. Second tip, you want to sip gradually throughout the day for better absorption and better hydration. This is really important. If you take somebody that has 75 ounces and they guzzle it over 3 different time periods during the day versus somebody that sips that 75 ounces gradually throughout the day, there's a massive difference in how they absorb that water, how it gets into the cells and every single cell of your body, from your bone to your muscle to your brain to your heart. There's a massive difference. So sipping gradually throughout the day is hugely important when it comes to absorption and hydration. The third tip, add electrolytes for increasing hydration of your cells. And if you aren't using something like Element, which is what I recommend, and it's certainly not the only good one out there, but if you aren't using something like Element, make sure you're doing your research, you're finding something that isn't junk. And unfortunately, the main ones out there like Liquid IV along with Gatorade and Powerade, I mean, those things are just pure crap, as I've talked about in the past. You also want to avoid sugary drinks, including fruit juices. So I talked about yogurt probably being like the number one promoted as health food that's actually junk food, conventional yogurt, that is. And then if I had to pick a number 2, and it's probably a tie, it would be sugary fruit drinks. And not, when I say sugary fruit drinks, I mean the ones even that say organic 100% fruit juice. It's still pure sugar without the fiber in there. Your body doesn't know how to handle that sugar, and it has a cascade of effects, negative effects on your body and on your children's body when you're doing that. So you want to avoid those sugary drinks, including fruit juices that are just pure sugar. Avoid alcohol for many reasons, but for one, it increases hot flashes and weight gain, especially for perimenopausal and postmenopausal women. So incredibly important to avoid or at least limit that alcohol. You can refer to my alcohol podcast for some specifics on that. When it comes to sleep, we know that a lack of sleep, and especially a lack of good, proper, deep stages of sleep, has a huge effect on hormonal balance. And it will make someone going through perimenopausal symptoms especially spiral out of control with their symptoms. If you're not getting good sleep, everything falls apart from there because your body can't balance hormones and you cannot heal properly, and symptoms just run rampant because of that. Mouth taping, one of my favorite tips and tricks for improving the quality of your sleep. You're literally putting tape over your mouth to force you into nose breathing. I have a tape on our website under the Shop Now tab, Recovery, where it's a link to what I highly recommend for a proper mouth tape. So that's one tip that you can do to help sleep better. And then red or orange light. So avoiding blue light at least 2 hours before bed, and instead turning on red or orange light bulbs in your house, which you can buy on Amazon. I also have a link for that. But those red or orange lights, by avoiding a blue light, they're going to help you balance your circadian rhythm, getting your body ready for sleep, and then getting that better sleep again is going to balance hormones better. Stop eating 3 hours before bed, ideally. We already talked about the ideal would be 6 p.m. that you're stopping to eat with your circadian clock. But ideally, you're stopping eating at bare minimum 2 hours before you go to bed, but ideally 3 hours. That's going to help you hit those deep stages of sleep better. Caffeine, another huge one when it comes to sleep. Caffeine intake, you want to ideally withhold any caffeine intake for 90 minutes after waking and then stop it at around noon. So here's the deal with this, because I get a lot of questions every time that I talk about this. There's something called adenosine, and adenosine naturally builds in our body. It increases from the moment we wake, and it gradually continues to increase until we go to sleep. And adenosine is responsible for making us feel more sleepy and drowsy as the day goes on. So it's supposed to happen, getting our bodies ready for sleep. And what caffeine does is it is not actually directly a stimulant like most people think, but it acts as a stimulant by blocking adenosine receptors. So it blocks that receptor, and if you do that right away, you throw off that whole adenosine cascade. You're not allowing the body to work the way that it's supposed to. And then if you continue the caffeine after noon, same thing, you're throwing off that cycle tremendously. And you might be that type of person like I used to be, and I would say, like, hey, I can drink caffeine right up until 5, 6 p.m. I still sleep great. And I was basing that on the fact that I fell asleep and stayed asleep, which you absolutely can. But what the research shows is you're not getting into the deep stages of sleep, and that is the key to healing and balancing hormones. So I know a lot of people that just are not willing to follow this advice, and that's fine, and do all the other things that you can. But if you're willing, this can be life-changing for some people. So do not start caffeine until 90 minutes after waking. Stop caffeine intake right around noon every single day, and it is going to improve your quality of deep sleep. When it comes to toxicity, we know that toxins play a huge role in the disruption of hormones. Many toxins, such as microplastics and pesticides, they're actually known as what are called xenoestrogens. And xenoestrogens just means that they mimic estrogen activity in the body. And of course, those are everywhere around us. And yes, they are unavoidable. So that means we want to avoid them when we can. So I already talked about organic food enough, but that's where if you're eating organically, you're going to avoid the large majority of getting those estrogen mimicking pesticides and herbicides. But then as far as microplastics, there's the obvious, like people know about plastics in food storage containers and plastics in water bottles. Those things are huge and definitely something that you should avoid. But we don't think about the microplastics as well as flame retardants and all of the other chemicals that are in things like our mattresses, our pillows, our sheets. Those ideally you want to look for non-toxic options that don't have all of those things. Clothing. I know it sounds silly to talk about toxins in clothing, and this is not something that I've talked about enough, but hugely important to avoid microplastics in your clothing at a bare minimum with your underwear and your socks. So underwear, bras, t-shirts, socks, those are the main areas you want to focus on getting a non-toxic, organic, higher quality type of clothing. And again, I know like that is, I'm wearing a Voiri shirt right now that is microplastic. So by no means am I suggesting that I am perfect at this at all. It is an area that I do want to start talking about more and improving upon. But at the bare minimum, at least start with those undergarments. Boody, Boody, is my family's favorite brand when it comes to organic bamboo undergarments. So those are a couple of different overlooked areas, I think, when it comes to toxins. And then as I talked about the food and drink containers, like those things are hugely important. Your cookware, also hugely important to look at non-toxic sources of cookware. And then, as we already talked about, avoiding toxins in your foods is going to be hugely important. And then a really important thing to touch on that I didn't touch on when it comes to food, just because something says organic doesn't mean it's healthy for you. So they actually make organic, I don't know if they're actually the Oreo brand, but organic Oreo type cookies and many other organic junk foods. So that doesn't mean they're healthy for you by any means. They are still processed junk, and they're just less bad for you. So not healthy for you, less bad for you. So I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't consume them. If you are going to have a junk food, absolutely, when my family has junk food, that's what we look for. But just don't make the mistake of thinking because it says organic that it's a free pass and you can and should eat as much of it as you want, because that's just not true. Avoid medications whenever possible, huge hormone disruptors. Filter your cooking, drinking, bath, and shower water whenever possible. Never use tap water for any of those things, in my opinion. One of the most important and easiest things you can do is just filtering, and you can buy shower filters anywhere. We have a great one on our website. You can use those for obviously your bath and shower water, but then also you can get an under the sink filter that is going to remove so many of those nasty toxins, chlorines and fluorides, and many, many, many other things, including microplastics that are in that tap water. So huge things to avoid. Nutridyne is my number one choice for the vast majority of my family supplements. I'm a huge fan of nearly everyone taking what I call the foundational 4 supplements: a multivitamin, a spore-based probiotic, omega-3 fish oil, and vitamin D3 with K2. The large majority of people are deficient in many of these nutrients, and they are the building blocks to gut health, immune system strength, brain health, heart health, and every other aspect of your health. Don't fall into the trap of chasing symptoms with supplements, and instead start to rebuild your health with the foundational 4. We partnered with Nutridyne so that you can save 15% on every order, and not just with the foundational 4, but all of your other supplements as well. Go to foundationalhealth365.com, click on Shop Brands, and then Nutridyne, set up your account, and you're all set to automatically get 15% off all orders. Now let's get back to the Foundational Health Podcast. Okay, moving on to exercise. And this is where we are going to spend the bulk of our time today. And as I dive into this, you will fully understand why. So let's start with, what is exercise? Exercise is an incredibly positive stress on the body that makes positive changes in the central nervous system all the way down to the very, very smallest cellular level. That's hugely important to understand. It improves your stress response to everything and allows you to handle stress better. Exercise literally trains your body and mind how to handle stressful situations better. The more you exercise, you literally not only become physically stronger, which everybody relates to exercise, but you become mentally stronger the more that you exercise. Can't stress that enough. Hugely important, and it's an overlooked part of exercise. And there are many reasons that women are not small men. So that is not a term that I coined by any means. It is from Dr. Stacy Sims, who a lot of this information that I'm going to talk about today pertaining to exercise comes from. So we'll have a link to her in our show notes. She has done some incredible research that, as I mentioned earlier, it just wasn't done before. They had done tons of exercise research and still do a ton of exercise research, but almost all of it was done on men, and then just assuming that that applied to women as well. And then also a lot of it, when it was done on women, it was done on just young college age women, or it was done on just looking at some generalized things in women, but not actually looking what happens to hormones when women do specific things with their exercise. We all know there are tremendous hormonal differences between women and men, but something that is not talked about enough is the aging process and the difference between an aging woman and an aging man. Men age in what is considered to be a much more linear fashion, as in like testosterone gradually declines as they age, as opposed to women, when they hit perimenopause and then enter menopause, there is a very drastic and immediate shift in their hormones. Why is that important, and how does it pertain to exercise? Well, estrogen acts on a woman like testosterone acts on a man when it comes to lean mass, which, by the way, lean mass is muscle and bone. So I'm going to talk about lean mass a few more times. Just know that lean mass, we often talk about lean muscle mass, and we think that it just means muscle, but lean mass means muscle and bone. And we know that during perimenopause, lean mass is one of the first things to go. So here's how it works. Estrogen is responsible for stimulating the muscle cell to grow and develop in women. So similar to what testosterone does in men, estrogen is responsible for stimulating the muscle cell and allowing it to grow. So when estrogen becomes erratic during perimenopause, which it does for all women, but it becomes more erratic when you're not doing the things that we've talked about so far, and your ratios of estrogen to progesterone are also off, you cannot stimulate the muscle in the same way unless you change the way you're exercising and start to do some female hormone specific things. Okay, so let's talk about muscle and the importance of strength training first. We're going to dive into cardio and some other things as well, but we're going to start with muscle and the importance of strength training. So we know as we age, men and women, that we lose muscle and start losing muscle around the age of 30. And that applies to almost all women and men. Sometimes it happens at a little bit earlier or later stage in life. And then, of course, if you are not actively trying to keep that muscle as well as bone, you are going to lose a much greater percentage than someone who is strength training and doing all of the right things to actively keep that muscle and bone as well. So muscle is considered by many natural health experts as the organ of longevity. And that's because of the tremendous effect that it has on so many different bodily functions and the fact that it is hugely important for our quality of life. So muscle helps maintain so many different systems in the body, including your immune system, as well as strengthening your bones, improving your gut microbiome, and so much more, all the way down to blood sugar control, which is dramatic, actually, a dramatic effect. It also improves your brain health. It decreases your chances of cognitive decline as you age, and it does that through a number of different pathways. One of those would just be the simple brain-gut connection. The healthier your muscles are, the healthier your gut is. The healthier your gut is, the healthier your brain is. And almost every single time that I start talking about strength training and adding muscle, especially with women, and really as it pertains to women, including my wife in the past, the first thing that would come up is, I don't want to get bulky. So let's address that. Here's the deal. Unless you are eating a tremendous amount of calories, a tremendous amount of protein calories, especially, and lifting a lot on a regular basis, along with doing pretty much no cardio, you have close to zero risk of getting bulky. I can't say that enough. Almost zero risk of getting bulky. And even if you do have that genetic makeup to get bulky, it's not like it happens overnight. So when you see bulky women and bodybuilders, they're actively trying to build bulk, and you can go talk to them. That didn't happen overnight. So you aren't going to just start strength training and lifting weights and then wake up in the morning and being bulky. That's not how it works. So that really is not a valid concern at all. The next part to me is incredibly fascinating, and it's also something that's very important to understanding when it comes to women specifically. So women have more endurance fibers and men have more fast twitch muscle fibers. And without going through all of the science, here's the important takeaway of what that means and how it pertains to the discussion for today. Women can and should have less rest time between exercise sets because less rest time actually increases your strength gains. So I'm going to repeat that. Less rest time actually increases women's and young women, girls' strength gains, which is exactly what you want especially as you age, but really for anybody who's working out, that's what you want. So that is a woman-specific recommendation, less rest time. So when you're strength training, you want to shoot for about 2 minutes of rest time between sets. And I'm not going to go through all of the specific studies on this, but they've done specific studies where they have looked at men and women and 3 minutes of rest time between working sets, and men do fantastic with that. Then they look at 2 minutes and men still do fantastic with that, and 1 minute and men do fantastic. Well, for women, that's not the case. When they're doing 1 or 2 minutes of rest, they do great. When they get up to 3 minutes, it starts to affect pretty dramatically, actually, their strength gains. So you want to shoot for less rest time in between sets as a woman. And the really great news there is, of course, your workouts will take less time if you're incorporating that. And I realize there's always pushback on this. I'm doing research for this and looking at social media, when I've seen some of the people that are talking about this research and very valid research that's finally been done. You've got tons of women posting on there well, if this is true, then why do I still see gains? Nobody said you weren't going to see gains. The studies now being done just simply show you can have better gains. So it's not that things don't work. We're talking about how to do it ideally to work with the female body, not that this is like a cut and dry, you can't see gains, you're not going to get any benefit. That is not at all what we're talking about here today. We're talking about how to do it better. So definitely keep that in mind. I'm not going to repeat that over and over, but it's a really important thing to understand, because that is the feedback that you will often get if you start talking about this to people that really aren't aware of the research. They're going to say that's not true. If that was true, then women wouldn't be getting any improvements, and that's just not the case at all. So the great news again is that your workouts will take less time if you incorporate this, and you're going to get more benefit from actually taking less time, which obviously is fantastic. And the bonus, an added bonus upon that, is it improves your metabolism and how your body responds to and processes food. So when you're taking less time with your workout, you actually improve metabolism and you improve how your body responds to food. So we have to just stop looking, and this is in general for men and women, we have to stop looking at exercise as an optional thing if indeed your goal is to be healthy, not only for the short term, but especially in the long term when it comes to longevity and quality of life. It is so incredibly important. So whether you're a woman in your 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or up from there, here's a few things that you should follow. You should always be doing strength training 2 to 3 days a week. So 3 days a week would be more ideal, but always something is better than nothing, right? So 3 days a week is more in the ideal range. And women in their 20s and early 30s, when it comes to specific strength training, they can and often should do more like a 10 to 12 reps. So this is where a lot of the male research has been done, but it still can apply absolutely to females when we're talking about repetitions. So the 10 to 12 rep recommendation, which I've often talked about in the past, where a woman in their 20s can do that, and even in their early 30s, and can go to failure or close to failure, and they can do that and still get great results. Now, if you want to get better results, again, shorten your rest time, and it's going to even improve that. But then as you get into women in their mid-30s and estrogen and progesterone start to change, then it's important to change up the way that you're working out. So this is where you want to move into more power-based training. So because of the hormonal changes, if you continue with the 10 to 12 reps, it just becomes harder to gain muscle and to build strength as you age. Power-based means 0 to 6 to 8 reps, somewhere in that range. I'm a much bigger fan of doing the majority of your work in that 6 to 8 rep range. And it's important to go heavy. So it's not like you can, pick up a 10-pound dumbbell and just, do 6 reps and say, okay, I did my 6 reps of power-based training. That's not what power-based means. So you can't just go through the motions with a light weight for 6 reps and think that you're going to get results. You have to do heavy weight. That is what power training means. And obviously, if you're doing nothing right now, the last thing you want to do is to go try to squat heavy weights. So it's certainly the goal you want to attempt to achieve, if that is your goal, but you want to do that smartly and slowly. And this is ideally where you're hiring a personal trainer who's knowledgeable, willing to listen to your wants and needs, or finding someone to follow online that's familiar with this research. I highly recommend, as I mentioned already, listening to and following Dr. Stacy Sims. She has not only great information herself, but then she's also got great recommendations for other women to follow online that are going to give you the right advice. And Dr. Stacy Sims has on her website, which I was just going through that this morning, she's got fantastic programs for purchase, whether it's somebody that is a woman, a young woman that is still menstruating, if it's a teenager, also for women in their 30s that are preparing for perimenopause or postmenopausal women. She's got great programs to follow. So as you get into those later stages of life, it's where you want to focus on those heavier, lower reps. And she talks about something called 2 reps in reserve. So you're not going to what is considered failure on these, because this is where injury can happen, but let's use 6 reps as an example here. So if you're doing a bicep curl and you pick up a 20-pound dumbbell and you can get 6 reps and you feel like, I can maybe eke out 2 more of those with pretty good form, it's okay to stop at 6. So you're stopping at 6 with what she again calls 2 reps in reserve. So those are just good general rules to follow. Again, anything is going to be better than nothing without a doubt. And also remember that any resistance training is better than no resistance training, and any movement is better than none. So don't think if you're not willing or able to lift heavy weights that you should just do nothing. So I know in having a few discussions in the last week as I was preparing for this podcast with women in the office, like, well, I'm never going to lift heavy. That's like, so what am I supposed to do? Well, follow the something is better than nothing rule. So if you're not willing to lift heavier weights, then continue to do something without a doubt. So even if you're doing your own body weight for body weight squats, or, you can only do 6 repetitions of that, that's fantastic. So then that would be doing heavy weight. Like if that is, you're able to do 6 body weight reps for a body weight squat, great, then stick with that. Or for that matter, doing the something is better than nothing. If your body weight squats, you can do 100, but you're only willing to do 6. Well, fantastic. Just do something for sure. Something is always better than nothing. So you have to think long term. You have to focus on what is your quality of life going to look like when you're 80 years old or 90 years old or above. And even if you're in your 20s right now, which I know in my 20s, the last thing I thought about is what I was going to look like, feel like, what my quality of life was going to be like when I was in my 90s, but can't recommend starting that early and reminding yourself of it often, making that your goal. So that should be the long-term focus, but obviously it's still fantastic to set short-term goals on looking better, feeling better, healing better, whatever that looks like for you. You get to decide what that looks like. Free weights, as in barbells, dumbbells, and then even things like bands. When it comes to strength training, resistance training, those are always going to be better than machines from the simple fact that you're using more balance. With bands and dumbbells, you're using all those what they call like intrinsic muscles, those stabilization muscles and tendons and ligaments. So you're going to incorporate a lot more of that, which are also better for your joints as you age. But that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with doing machines. I personally think that the bulk of your work should come from free weights, but if you're a gym member and you like using machines, when I go to a gym, which isn't very often anymore, strictly on vacation primarily, I love using machines as well. So by no means Does that mean you shouldn't use them? Just do the bulk of your work on free weights and bands. Okay, we're going to shift gears here a little bit and move into cardio. So this one is going to get a little controversial, and I'm going to try to not focus on that too much. I'll try to get my point across here early on. Long endurance cardio, which everybody has been trained to do, is not ideal for women in general, according to studies, but especially for perimenopausal women specifically. So I'm talking about what is called zone 2 exercise specifically. And yes, I realize this is what most female-based classes and entire gyms are designed around. So don't shoot the messenger. I'm just reporting on what the science shows. So why is it not ideal at all for women, especially in the perimenopausal phase, according to the research? During menopause, women have high levels of cortisol already. During perimenopause, women have high levels of cortisol already. And then when you do zone 2 moderate long endurance type exercise where you're doing 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, whether it's in a class or you're going out for a jog, anything that is in that zone 2, you're running on your treadmill, you're sitting on your bike for 45 to 60 minutes, it additionally spikes your cortisol. So you've already got high levels of cortisol to begin with when you're in that perimenopause phase of life, and then you're additionally spiking that cortisol, and that sets off a cascade of not so good hormonal effects that increase symptoms like hot flashes and mood swings, as well as weight gain. And then it further puts women into what they call that tired and wired state that comes from having high elevated levels chronically of cortisol. So I get that this goes against the messaging out there, but keep in mind that the messaging is not based on legitimate science done on women, and specifically not based on legitimate science done on women going through perimenopause and how it affects their hormones. So thank God that research has finally been done. Increased cortisol has lots of detrimental effects on your body. Some of the big ones include, but are not limited to, being able to handle stress very well at all. So when you have increased cortisol, you don't handle any stress, and little things that you normally would be able to just kind of let roll off your back, or, if your kids are acting up and you normally say like, hey, don't do that, have a conversation with them. This is when people fly off the handle because they cannot handle, their brain doesn't allow them to handle that stressful situation at all. Cortisol also, we know it feeds candida and other bad bacteria in the gut. We know that elevated levels of cortisol also increase belly fat, men and women. Who wants that? It also impairs the body's ability to heal and impairs cell regeneration. So if you would Google, how does elevated levels of cortisol affect the body for symptoms, you'll find a list a mile long, and really it comes down to what I just mentioned. If you understand how the body works, and you know that you're impairing the body's ability to heal and impairing cell regeneration, which is healing, any symptom is possible. And that is why those long duration cardio, those sessions are just not good for you if you're in that perimenopausal state, but really for women in general. So I get that you might be very attached to your 45-minute zone 2 moderate cardio because of feeling like, hey, I'm doing something great for my body. And I also get that the influencers and podcasters and people selling books and programs will likely continue to promote it for perimenopausal women. But just remember, none of that is based on actual science of testing what happens to women, especially during perimenopause, that do that type of exercise. So for the first time ever, that specific science is being done. And for people that are choosing to give up that form of exercise and instead, this is important, instead switch to what is called sprint interval training and focus on strength training, like we already talked about, this is absolutely life-changing for them. And I mean incredibly life-changing. So just a side note before I dive into some more specifics on this, let's talk about walking here for a second. So going for walks is still great, and it's always going to be great. And I'll go back to the something is better than nothing. And so going for a walk on a regular basis, especially from a social aspect, if you're doing it with your family and your spouse or your friends, that should be something that you're always doing and you're always doing on a regular basis. But if you want to improve upon that, according to this research, doing them on actually more leisurely strolls are going to be better if you're increasing different types of cardio, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And then for somebody that's really into exercise and wants to improve upon their walks, you work in a little bit of interval training on that. So you stop and do some jumping jacks, or stop and jump in place a little bit, what's called impact training, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then also doing hills, and then taking a very slow stroll down the opposite side of the hill. Those things are just going to improve the good aspects of walking on a regular basis. So I do not want that to come across as don't go for walks. That's not what we're talking about here. So as far as specific cardio goes, you want to focus on doing high intensity interval training in something that is specifically called sprint training. So sprint training, which does not mean actual sprinting or running, although it could. The sprint training is 30 seconds as hard as you can go at whatever activity it is that you choose to do, whether it is on a bike, whether it is on a rowing machine, whether it's on a treadmill, or whether it's just jumping up and down in place. Whatever it is that you choose to do. For instance, my wife has incorporated this since learning, and she can definitely speak to how it makes her feel afterwards and how much better she sleeps. She chooses to do it on the treadmill. She absolutely loves those 30-second intervals on the treadmill, going as hard as you can, again, at whatever activity it is that you choose to do. And then you follow that 30 seconds of going as hard as you can by 1 to 4 minutes of rest. So that's really important. You want full recovery. And I say the 1 to 4 minutes because obviously that's going to differ depending on your level of fitness. So some people might feel like, hey, I'm fully recovered in a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And then the next person might need 4 minutes of recovery before they feel like they're starting to recover. And if you're not recovered after 4 minutes, then that's all you're going to do for right now. But ideally, you want to do, as a maximum, you want to do 5 rounds of this. So 30 seconds, literally as hard as you can go at whatever activity is you're doing, followed by 1 to 4 minutes of rest for 5 rounds. And that's it. That's all you would have to do. And then you would want to repeat that, of course, and do that more than once a week. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So that short burst of energy trains your body to not store fat, but instead to use that fat for fuel. So that sounds pretty great, right? And it is. So trains your body with that short burst of energy to use fat for fuel instead of storing it. It also opens your muscles to get in the fuel that it needs to grow. So it's saying, don't store fat, instead use it for fuel, and it's saying to your body to start to build more muscle. So it improves the health of your blood vessels as well, we know, from constricting and dilating, which means better blood pressure. And then after doing that type of specific sprint interval training, your body will literally have what's called a rebound effect. What that means is cortisol will be reduced instead of increased like it is with the zone 2 training. Cortisol will be reduced. Human growth hormone will be increased. Testosterone, so women still have testosterone, which also will increase, which is exactly what you want. And It will, over time, decrease visceral organ fat. That's the really bad fat. That's disease causing. And it will get rid of the fat deposits that you see on the outside of your belly as well. I shouldn't say get rid of. It's not necessarily going to make them magically disappear. It will reduce over time that belly fat as well. Just like anything, it takes time. Your muscles will begin to literally communicate with your body fat and say, hey, we don't need you. So that is what you're doing by doing this type of sprint training. So if you incorporate this type of training 2 to 4 times per week, it allows your body to get into what they call a parasympathetic state or a parasympathetic mode when it comes time to go to sleep, which is the exact mode, that parasympathetic state. That's the exact state you need to be in to hit those very important healing deep stages of sleep, which not only allows your body to heal better, but part of that healing is balancing hormones. And then you, on top of that, incorporate the other things that we talked about when it came to sleep earlier, and your sleep can become magical. So that's worth repeating. Doing sprint interval training 2 to 4 times per week will dramatically improve your deep stages of sleep, which in turn will dramatically improve your hormones and every single aspect of your life and health if you incorporate it and do it consistently. A great game plan for women is to lift 3 days a week along with sprint training 3 days per week as well. So that's a really good game plan. You don't have to do this 4, 5, 6 days. You absolutely can, but for the average person, I would recommend shooting for 2 to 3 days, ideally 3 days per week of incorporating what we talked about for your age specific for strength training, as well as this type of sprint training for any age per week. And then the great thing is you can combine these. So you can do your strength training first and then follow it up with some sprint training. And there's no reason that workout should take more than like 30 minutes for a beginner, or even for somebody doing advanced strength training workouts followed by sprint training. There's no reason it should take much more than an hour of your time. And there's no way there are a lot of people out there that don't have that amount of time in their week. You just have to focus on what's important to you and make time for it. Now let's talk about something that I mentioned earlier called impact training. This is really huge. There was a study done that took women who had a diagnosis of osteopenia. And if you don't know what osteopenia is, it is the stage of bone loss prior to osteoporosis. So it's when they can see on a scan that you are starting to lose bone mass. So not a good thing. And it is told to many women that this is an inevitable process as you age and your hormones change. It's an inevitable process as you go through perimenopause and menopause. It happens to almost everybody. The key is it doesn't happen to everybody. So is it an inevitable process? And what we're finding is the answer is no. So when they did this study, they took women that had this diagnosis of osteopenia and had them do impact training through just jumping for 10 minutes 3 times per week. And the jumping doesn't have to be anything fantastic. You're just standing on the floor and jumping up and down. But really the focus was during this, not like if you're familiar with a box jump where you jump up on a box and you jump down and you're going to bend your knees to lessen the impact. You actually want impact. So you're doing stiff-legged jumping for more impact for the bone. And after 12 weeks, so we're talking 3 months of doing this, 10 minutes per day, 3 times per week. So not 10 minutes every day, 10 minutes at a time, 3 times per week. After 3 months of doing that, follow-up tests showed that these women who had osteopenia no longer had it. They had literally normal bone density in 3 months. So another incredible example how absolutely miraculous and amazing God created our bodies. We are self-healing, self-regulating machines. And as long as we know what to do and do what we're supposed to do, our bodies can and will respond incredibly, incredibly well. So we're going to jump back into nutrition just a little bit here, but as it applies to exercise. So there's something called fasted training. If you're not familiar with fasted training means that you're training without eating first. And really, fasted training technically means you haven't even eaten that day. So you're doing a workout in the morning or you're doing a workout at noon and you still haven't eaten yet. That would be considered fasted training. So there is a ton of information out there on the benefits of fasted training, which means training, again, done before eating any food for the day. So there's a ton of research showing the benefits of doing this, but here's the problem, and what we haven't been previously told by everyone touting this research. The research was done on men and showed positive results. When the same research is done on women, it shows the polar opposite, which is negative results. So without going deep into the science, it comes down to the difference in brains between men and women and the fact that women have a much greater demand for endocrine health, hormonal health, because of having a menstrual cycle. So ultimately, when a woman is doing fasted training, the brain of a woman sees that as a threat. So in studies, literally after 4 days of doing fasted training, women show a decrease in thyroid hormones being produced and a decrease in proper thyroid function. That's literally in 4 days of doing fasted training. That's not a good thing. We also, in women, see an increase in elevated levels of cortisol from doing fasted training. If you remember what we talked about earlier, that cortisol spikes 30 minutes into the day after waking. And so that's part of this whole picture, that cortisol is spiking. And then if you're doing a fasted training on top of that, you're going to spike it even more, which is not what you want because that leads to elevated levels of cortisol. So not just a short-term effect. Short-term effect is good. Cortisol isn't always bad. We should see elevated levels of cortisol, but it should be a short-term, not a long-term thing. And then women also enter what is called a catabolic state with fasted training, which a catabolic state means that your body is breaking things down. So this breaking down is happening somewhat with fat. That's the good part of a catabolic state. But what we also see is that you're also catabolizing, you are cannibalizing yourself in a sense. And the first thing to go for women when they train fasted is their lean mass, muscle and bone. So that is the first thing that happens when you're training fasted. So clearly not a good thing. The reason this happens is because, again, your brain, specifically your hypothalamus, sees this fasted training as a threat, and then it goes into survival mode where it starts to break down lean muscle and bone tissue, and it starts to use it for survival. That's what it means by going into survival mode. So this happens in all women, but the effects are magnified and compounded dramatically during perimenopause and menopause. So keep in mind, this differs from woman to woman for sure. And often for postmenopausal women, they will, as I mentioned earlier, see a decrease in fat, especially with belly fat, by doing fasted training. And this is why so many women will say, again, if you look online, like, I've been doing this and it works for me. When I trained fasted, I lost my belly fat, which is great. So I'm not saying that's not a good thing. But then when we actually look internally, even in these women that are losing belly fat, they're also first losing lean tissue, losing muscle, losing bone. That's the first thing that happens. And some studies that were done specifically looking at belly fat and visceral fat showed positive changes in, again, losing the fat for postmenopausal women, but negative changes for actually the bone and muscle loss. So incredibly, incredibly important if you're a woman that you're not doing fasted training, if you're concerned with balancing hormones in the short term as well as your long-term health when it comes to losing or gaining muscle and bone. So women in their 20s and 30s should again focus on strength and hypertrophy training in the 10 to 12 rep range, going to failure. Women in their late 30s and 40s and beyond should focus more on strength training with 2 reps in reserve. Women in the perimenopause and menopause stage should absolutely avoid moderate cardio, calorie burning, endurance type workouts, and instead focus on strength training and high intensity interval training, more specifically strength training that's called power training, and that high intensity training that's called sprint training. All right, let's talk about some bonus tips that I mentioned in the beginning. Some of the bonus tips for today. You may have noticed that I did not talk about things like hormone replacement therapy, and I may do that on a separate podcast in the future, perhaps. But here are my quick thoughts on that. Remember, perimenopause and menopause are both natural parts of aging, and therefore they should not be treated as a disease and looked at as a problem to solve. It is perfectly normal and expected to experience changes in the body and certain symptoms. The goal is to work with your body to go through that process as naturally and smoothly as possible instead of treating it like a disease and increasing hormones that are supposed to naturally change and decrease. So am I a fan of hormone replacement therapy? No, I'm not. Am I saying don't do it? No, I don't ever say that to anybody because it is a personal choice. Those are just my opinions on it. I'm always a fan of giving the body what it needs so the body can do what it's supposed to do. And what it's supposed to do is going to happen at a much better and smoother rate when you're doing all of those right things. When it comes to supplements, specifically for balancing hormones as well as for symptoms, always start with the foundational 4 so you make sure you've got that foundation to begin with. So start with a multivitamin, a probiotic, vitamin D3, K2, and then also omega-3 fish oils. We have all of those on our website under the Nutridyne tab. So start there for sure. From there, I'm a big fan of combo supplements, especially in this category, because there are so many different great vitamins, minerals, adaptogenic herbs that can help with not only symptoms, but also can achieve just better hormonal balance overall. Some of my favorites that Nutridyne has to offer, there's really 4 main ones when it comes to this. One is called menopause support, obviously for women going through menopause. It helps tremendously. I have so many women that have just raved about how this has helped them with symptoms. Perimenopause support, same thing. Women that have raved about migraines being gone and hot flashes being gone and how much it has helped them with their symptoms as well. And then there's another one called Estro Balance. This can help with women at any stage of life that are having problems with balancing their estrogen. And then this one is also even great for young women that are still in that menstrual phase of life. And then if you are choosing some sort of like hormone replacement therapy, then I'm a bigger fan of doing natural creams that you can control more and making sure that they actually are natural. And Nutridyne actually has one of those called Estro Pro Cream, which is a natural progesterone and estrogen cream. So those are my 4 favorites that Nutridyne has to offer. Creatine is another supplement that we can't talk about exercise, we can't talk about hormones in women without talking about creatine. It's essential for muscle contraction, but it's beneficial for gut health, it's beneficial for brain health, it's beneficial for heart health, and it also improves tremendously women's health during pregnancy, believe it or not. And yes, It has been studied for its effectiveness during pregnancy as well as its safety during pregnancy. So great for that. And it's also very beneficial for women going through perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, because it helps for mood, skeletal and bone health. Your body produces 2 to 3 grams of creatine on its own. You can also, depending on your red meat intake especially, you can get another 1-2 grams per day from food. So as far as supplementing goes, you can vary it a little bit depending on your body size, depending on your level of intake of red meat. But as a general rule for women, in addition to what your body does, in addition to your food, get like 5 to 7 grams per day, depending on those other factors. Caffeine. We already talked about caffeine enough earlier. I'll just mention it again here because it's an excellent pre-workout that a lot of women love to throw in. You just want to make sure, ideally, you're not becoming dependent on that as your pre-workout, that you're not overdoing it. You also want to make sure that if you're getting that workout within 90 minutes of waking up, that you're ideally delaying that caffeine and allowing your body's natural energy to kick in instead so you don't screw up that adenosine cycle. So without a doubt, the ideal situation is that you are testing your hormones. So all of the things that I talked about, even for somebody that's not willing to test them, they're still fantastic to do. But in the ideal situation, you're finding out what is your hormonal balance, where are things off, is your estrogen high, is your progesterone low, vice versa. And the best way to do that, most women are actually familiar with this, it's called the Dutch hormone test. We have a new spot on our website specifically for testing in general, and the Dutch hormone test is one of those, and it's one of the best things that you can do to find out where you're at. And if anybody has any specific questions on that and whether or not you think it's a good idea to do, just go to our website, the Contact Us part of the website, and that's going to send an email directly to me. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, and I can answer any specific questions on that. Essential oils. So let's talk essential oils because these can be really important when it comes to hormones. Clary sage is the most effective for balancing hormones and relieving symptoms, including anxiety and hot flashes. So clary sage, that would be the number one. Roman chamomile helps with stress reduction, also a really, really good one. And then you have things like peppermint oil, which can help cool the body during a hot flash. So not a lot of studies done that show balancing hormones. It just helps you feel better by cooling the body when you're having a hot flash, if you're having one. Thyme oil has also been shown to help naturally balance hormones. So those are all really good ones. Nutridyne has some amazing essential oils, so you can find all of those on our website as well. And then a great way to apply those is you can rub 3 drops of whatever your chosen oil is, or you can do a combination of those on the tops of your feet and then also on the back of your neck. You can do that 1 to 3 times a day. Many women find this helps tremendously with hormonal balance as well as with their symptoms. And then if you want to dilute those oils, because sometimes they can be a little powerful depending on your skin sensitivity and other factors, you just use something like a organic jojoba oil, actually pronounced jojoba, but spelled jojoba. So it's Jojoba, or coconut oil. And also ideally you want to do that organic. So those are what are called carrier oils. You mix the essential oils in with a small amount of that and then apply it to the skin, and it works absolutely fantastic. So that's another tip that can help tremendously with symptom relief. So I know that without a doubt, I threw a lot of information at you today. This was a longer podcast, but I really hope that it hits home, and I highly recommend listening to this one again. If you're like my wife and you think I talk too slow, you can listen to it in 1.2 time or 1.4 times speed to get through it a little bit faster. But I highly recommend listening to it at least one more time, but ideally a few more times to let everything sink in, because I know it's a lot and I know a lot of it is new. My promise to anyone who chooses to follow me, anyone who chooses to listen to my podcast, is that I will always, always change with the new legitimate science. So, for example, I'm not going to continue to promote whey protein, as most of you know, just because it made me money in the past and I used to sell it. But I'm not going to continue to promote it just because I used to promote it. I will always tell you the truth about it, even when people don't want to hear it. So the truth is that it's a horrible source of protein that causes bloating, inflammation, weight gain, because 85% of it isn't absorbable and it converts to sugar in the body. The people that are selling it and promoting it aren't going to tell you that. Nutridyne offers it. I don't recommend it. Certainly you could do worse things for your body, and if that's what you want to take, then just listen to your body. But I would highly recommend looking at whole food sources of protein instead. I will also let you know if I've been wrong in the past, which I absolutely have with many things, especially with the topic that we discussed today, but I will always change and adapt with the new legitimate science. And the reality is, there's never been legitimate science when it comes to many things for women, especially as it pertains to hormones and fasting and exercise and perimenopause and menopause and all of the things that we talked about today. And as a result, a lot of the advice that was given is just flat out wrong in the past. It was based on scientific studies done on men that were fasting and male workouts, or whether or not you should do a workout fasted, but again, most of those were not looking deep enough. They were done on men. So my advice will never be based on clickbait and junk science or fads. So what I will warn you on is you definitely will need to be careful for listening right now to influencers, podcasters, trainers, doctors, friends, family, books, programs that are focused on the old non-research-based advice. One of the reasons that I actually recommend listening to this a few times to let it sink in, because otherwise you hear it and you're like, oh, that sounds like it makes sense. And then all of a sudden you just get bombarded with the other side and people saying like, oh, that's not true. This works for me. This works for me. And your doctor telling you do this. So you just have to be aware of that information that's still going to be out there, but it is non-research based advice, or actually was based on research, but the research was done, again, on men. And in the words, again, of Dr. Stacy Sims, who I'm a huge fan of, check out links to her in the show notes, women are not small men. I think that's probably pretty obvious, but I love that anyway. So I'm not suggesting all of those people, by the way, are giving bad advice for personal gain by any means. They're often very, very well-meaning people, but just remember, someone can be very sincere, but they can still be sincerely wrong. Your inspirational and educational takeaways for today. Number 1, success equals simple habits performed daily over time. Stay the course. Number 2, we are told knowledge is power, but is it? I would argue no, knowledge is not power. Knowledge is absolutely useless, but the application of knowledge is power. Applying those things that you learn when they make sense to you, that's where the power and the change comes in. So my prayer for you today is that I inspired you to take the knowledge from the podcast today and apply it to your daily life and share it with others, because you are a leader. And if you enjoyed today's podcast and found it beneficial, I want you to think about the women in your life who could really benefit from what we talked about here today. I want you to hit the share button on whatever platform you're listening on and drop that person a text and tell them to give this episode a listen. Until next time, make health your hobby. Thank you for listening to the Foundational Health Podcast. As always, if you would like to learn more about making health your hobby, visit our website at foundationalhealth365.com and follow me on Facebook at Kevin Schultz DC Foundational Health.